Hi everyone and welcome to this lunchtime live broadcast to celebrate International Women's Day 2021. And thank you Simon and Percy for arranging this and for inviting us all. And us are Aileen Carr, Fiona Forbes, Rachel Newton and myself, and I'm Eileen Penman. So International Women's Day, as you will all know, started many years ago, about 1909 in America, where women workers were getting organised in the trade union and labour movement to fight for higher pay, better working conditions and an end to child labour. So things have improved hugely, of course, since then, but still, more than 100 years later, women still don't have full equality with men. In fact, there are only 25% of legislators in the world who are women. And I think it's safe to say, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's safe to say that men still predominate in the music industry and certainly in traditional music. I just remember 38 years ago writing an article for the local folk magazine on this very thing. I just noticed the imbalance between men and women on the folk club stages, although there were always lots of women there in the audience. So it looks like things are a wee bit similar today, but we'll hear about that shortly. So we're going to have a good old chat about women, how we came into folk music, what keeps us there. We'll look at the older women's perspective, and we'll look at what it's like for young women today, whether they work in bands, whether they perform solo, or whether they teach or whether they compose. And also at the moment, in the face of COVID-19, the grimness of the last year of lockdowns has just played havoc economically for all these hundreds of hugely talented musicians. So we might have a chance to look at what the future holds in terms of employment opportunities. So I'm going to hand you over now to Rachel, who's going to kick off the discussion, I think. So over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Eileen, and hi everybody. Happy International Women's Day. So I'm, I suppose, partly here to talk about my role in the BIT Collective. The BIT Collective is an organisation that started about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and the aims of the BIT Collective is to sort of look at issues of equality in folk and traditional music, predominantly in Scotland, but beyond, and we have ties with other organisations in different countries. We kind of, I guess we were inspired to start when I kind of took to social media to have some rants about various things, including one of my bands, The She, being told by a festival organizer that they already had their female band for that year. And yeah, that definitely was a bit of a catalyst for kicking off a discussion between myself and peers and friends. And we ended up, I put on a discussion at Celtic Connections a few years ago around women in music. And shortly after that, myself and some of the other panelists, we started the BIT Collective, and we facilitate discussion, we put on events, we sort of lobby for change. And more recently, in the last year or so, in the wake of what I suppose is kind of a sort of Me Too moment for music, for folk and traditional music, we've been trying to look at how to make music a safer space for women. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm about with the BIT Collective and the issues that we've been looking at in the past few years. And yeah, I'm here to hear more from other people, other women, about their own experiences in folk and traditional music. And I was really interested to read Eileen's article a few years ago when it was shared online. So thanks, Eileen, for that.
It's really interesting that you say that when you were with She and you were in touch with promoters and they told you that they had already had a female band. I remember interviewing Ray Fisher years ago, about the same time as I wrote the article. And although Ray never felt particularly disadvantaged as a woman, because she was a gallus woman, was Ray, as you all know, but she did get annoyed at guys that said, "Oh, I've already got a female band for that gig or that festival." And she found it very annoying. So it's really quite disappointing to know that that is still happening today. I can't believe that.
Yeah, I mean, your article really sort of resonated, and it was so interesting to see that it, you know, there was a lot of things that were just haven't really changed that much at all, I would say. I think sometimes it can seem on the surface that things have changed, and obviously there have been a lot of great positive changes for women in general. But I think it's important to, maybe, although I seem like a bit of a doom harbinger of doom, but it's important to point out that there's definitely still a long way to go.
And I had kind of touched on or had been thinking about the thing about doing the Scots Women concert way back in 2001 and how depressing it was, reflecting on that situation, to realise, first of all, that it took 15 female acts to justify women being on the main stage at Celtic Connections. It was organised by a man and all the musicians were men. And in my thinking, I couldn't envisage that being the same for young women musicians now, because they're so much stronger and so much more independent. And I was contrasting that in my own mind with the concert that Gillian Frame and Barbara Dimmick and I put on at Celtic Connections in 2020, Floors of the Fairest, the concert we did to celebrate the musical lives of Gerdina McCulloch, Anne Nielsen and Maureen Jelks, three fantastic singers, three women who were very significant in the folk scene. And I just felt so positive about that fact that it wasn't all women who were on the programme. There were men and women, but the fact was that Celtic Connections at this stage in things was enabling women to organise something to celebrate women, and it didn't have to be fronted or organised by men. So I thought that was a very positive step forward in the years in between.
Definitely, Celtic Connections have been really, I think they've been quite positively kind of active in things like that. You know, I mean, I know that they've signed up to the Key Change 50-50 pledge to sort of have an equal balance in their programming, which that's definitely, that's encouraging, definitely.
Yeah.
Us women, a lot of us were involved in a 50-50 balance in representation within the trade union, because that didn't really exist. So it seems to be the same in all sectors of life. What about you, Fiona? You're awfully quiet.
I know. I was just thinking about. I know it's not like me to be quiet. I was thinking when Rachel was speaking about when the first time that the She were booked at the club that we helped to run in Kirkcaldy, and the band appeared to be shocked that Sandy, who is the booking person, had actually done what he said he was going to do, which was, I'll get in touch with you, I've got your number, and we'll see about a booking. And they appeared to be stunned by that. And I think that one of the things that's an issue, must be an issue for all bands, but especially for young bands who are trying to make a living in music, is how do you get bookings, and is there a sexist element to that as well? I know that we don't have that in our club, but I suspect that some might still have that I've worried in the past, as I said to you when we were discussing this, that women in music tend by some people to be looked upon as professional women football players, you know, very good, but not the real thing. And I'm fearful that that can still happen.
I think we've always had to fight our corner. Look at, you know, Fiona and Eileen and I are of a generation where when we came into folk music, well, it wasn't the professional business that it is now, but even just coming in to folk clubs and sessions and festivals, it was a male-dominated situation, and you maybe weren't that conscious of the discrimination in the beginning. I think it's maybe as you get older, you're more aware of it. But I felt that we really had to be strong enough to hold your own and to justify your place in the whole kind of musical sphere. And I don't want to tar all men with the same brush, because that's not the case of it. There were men who were very, very encouraging, but nonetheless, I felt as a singer, or an aspiring singer at that time, that you really did have to be strong enough to make your way into things, if you like, and to find a space that was yours. And I was thinking about things like sessions, which were often male dominated. A lot of the musicians, most of the musicians, looking back at my early session experience, would be be musicians who weren't necessarily interested in songs. So you would be sitting there waiting for your opportunity, and the opportunities for women to sing certainly were a lot fewer than they were for the instrumentalists to play. And I can remember the kind of situations where you got a chance to sing when they went up to the bar to get a drink. That kind of situation, because as I say, it wasn't really a professional business when I came into it. Anyway, it was just about the pleasure. You couldn't make a living singing. Actually, I couldn't at that time.
Mm. No, that sounds, I mean, similar experience to me, I suppose. I mean, my older brother introduced a family to folk music via Pete Seeger and the Weavers, Alan Lomax, Ewan McCall, Archie and Ray Fisher. So once I heard them, that was me. I loved it. And then I went to the Edinburgh Folk Festival. I don't know whether it was 1981, maybe. I can't quite remember. Maybe 80, I don't know. Anyway, and I was just blown away. They had some informal sessions down the stairs somewhere in the basement. And I think it was Ed Miller that was there. And he was very encouraging. I mean, Ed lives in Texas now, as you know, but I mean, I just couldn't sing. I was desperate to sing, but I was terrified. But eventually, I would be in my 30s. I mean, I wasn't just a youngster. I wasn't, but I still was terrified. I had a big lack of confidence. And why would anyone want to hear me singing kind of feeling, I didn't feel justified in a way, but eventually I did. And I don't know, I think the first song I've ever sung was the 51st Highland Division's Farewell to Sicily. Because even through the hurly-burly of life and being married and kids and divorce and blah, 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 I kept learning songs all the time and learning a few chords on the guitar. I never became a great guitarist, but, so the confidence did build. But as you say, Aileen, it wasn't a professional scene for us, although there were a few women around, like June Tabor maybe, and remember Maddie Pryor, people like that, and then Ray Fisher, of course, and Cilla Fisher. But,
and I can remember in the early 60s when I was still at school, seeing Ray on TV with her brother Archie at tea time, and that was quite an exciting thing to see folk. And at that time, Paddy Bell sang with the Corries, and her father-in-law was our next door neighbour. So to have Paddy arrive at the house, there was big excitement, because folk music everybody was interested in folk music, whether it was Irish, American, Scottish. Through the 60s, there was a huge, well, call it the revival, call it whatever you like. It was everywhere, and it seemed like everybody was interested in it. And I think another benefit of being around, it's not really to do with women specifically, but we were fortunate to be around when there were a lot of the older singers, source singers. We were able to hear whether it was what do you call her, Jeannie Robertson or whoever. There were a lot of people around, so there was a lot of excitement around folk music. You could go to folk clubs every night of the week. There were lots of festivals and stuff around, but it was still this way of the business of how did you make your way into it? How did you get a bit of floor space? How did you get? You were reliant on whoever was organising the club to invite you to get up and perform. You kind of did an apprenticeship, I suppose. But if I'm thinking, when I'm saying it wasn't, you could make a living out of it. I did sing professionally for a wee while in the early 80s with a band called Beg. And just thinking again about holding your own, they were all smokers. We were on tour in Scandinavia in sub-zero temperatures and traveling about in an ancient Volvo estate car. And their concession to me as an asthmatic with a sensitivity to cigarette smoke was to roll down the window and blow the smoke out the window as we were driving along.
So your choice was kipper or frozen.
Well, absolutely. But also, as I say, I couldn't make a living. I couldn't pay a mortgage doing that. I think it's much more structured now. We had a lot of fun. But again, if you were going, well, and I'm thinking about the first tour we went on was a Highland tour. And the guys in the band decided to save enough money so they could have money to buy beer. We would all camp. It wasn't really taking me into consideration, but there was I with my fancy shoes, camping in a tent in a bog and going out to sing in a hall somewhere afterwards, which is madness when I when I look back on it. So yeah, you weren't really considered very, very highly. I wonder whether the musicians didn't see themselves as being, who happened to be men, didn't see themselves as being more important than the singer in that circumstance.
Rachel, would you say that the bit? Oh, sorry, Fiona. Would you say that the bit since you started it, since it was established, has it had a good influence on sexism, say, in the folk music industry, like with promoters and male performers? Is it maybe?
It's kind of hard to tell in some ways. I think maybe what it has been, hopefully what we have achieved, is to bring together a network of mostly women, but also there are some men who are interested in talking about this stuff. And I think that that's hopefully been quite empowering for people to feel like it's not just them. I was going to actually ask, Aileen, when you were talking about your experiences, like, was there a network of women that you could talk to about that, or did you feel quite alone within that? I suppose that's maybe hopefully what we do.
No, there wasn't really. And when I reflect back on it, with so many things in your life, you just thought you had to go on with it. And I ended up, I left the band actually because, the smoking thing actually was a huge issue for me as a singer. Because of how it impacted on my voice. But if I contrast it also in the 80s, round about the same time, I was invited to do a summer Highland tour with Sandy Coghill, Homebrew, who were hugely successful at the time, these lovely guys from Shetland, and Malcolm Jones from Runrig. And that was a different experience again. Sandy was very organised. He organised the tour. Everything was very, very organised. And the guys were very paternal with me. They really, really looked after me. Like when we were camping and there were a lot of midges around, they put my tent in between theirs, that sort of thing, so that when I screamed because the midges were biting me in the middle of the night, there'd be somebody there to help me. But I mean, I'm being kind of tongue in cheek in that. No, there wasn't really anybody you could discuss it with. But when you did get together with women, you I suppose the things we talked about were like our voices and how to protect our voices. But yeah, I suppose we talked about. We must have. I'm trying to think, looking back, but what then just kind of flew into my mind. My head's. It's all this kind of lockdown on your own for so long. My head's all over the place. But I was also remembering, also in the 1980s, experience that I had. And Sheena Wellington and her husband had a guest house in St Andrews. And at that time, there used to be Jean Redpath fronted the summer school at Stirling University, and they did a week on traditional song. I never really went to these, but Sheena and a lot of other people did. And on the back of that, she thought, what a great idea to give the opportunity to women to come together for a weekend in a safe situation, staying in her guest house, where we could talk about all sorts of things and sing and have fun and get to know each other. And the flack she and the rest of us got for that was really quite eye-opening. That there were men who reacted very badly to that, wondered what we were about, and said that we must be lesbians, that we would be getting together to sing on our own. So yeah, there were a lot of different kinds of things. I mean, sexism raises its head in different kinds of ways. It wasn't just about men behaving inappropriately towards you, which was there as well, but just about the attitude. Well, a whole lot of women together singing well, obviously. You know, there is a sexist aspect to people thinking that you're lesbians. So yeah, there were a lot of things that you, and I guess mostly you just thought you just had to get on with it. So it's quite good to reflect back and discuss it now with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah. I remember, I think I mentioned in 1983 in Edinburgh, there was a big thing called Women Live. It wasn't just it wasn't folk music, it was about all sorts of women performers in the arts. A lot of it took place in the Storytelling Centre, and it was a platform opportunity for women to perform without any other kind of sexist innuendo or anything coming in like that. And I remember being involved in that, and also with the Crown Folk Club, which was the Edinburgh University Folk Song Society. And out of that came a band called Sprangine. Now that was 7 women. And that's the first all-woman band that I remember, and that would be 1984. And they were brilliant musicians and singers, Gaelic singers. Out of that came Patsy Seddon and Mary McMaster and Luther Shealis and the women did all the right thing. But they played, and they were just brilliant. And they produced one CD, one album, one long playing record, which was then engineered onto a CD, about 2004 or something like that. Years later, it got put onto a CD and had a relaunch of it. They were just brilliant, but that was very unusual in the 80s to see 7 women in the band singing and playing all different instruments. You know, it was fantastic. So
my experience was quite different because I didn't sing in public until I was 40, and we had Anne Murray had been, she won, I think it was Muchty, the singing competition, and the prize was you would get a gig at Danny Kyle ran the Attic Club in Paisley, and by accident, me, her and Scott got together. The guest didn't turn up to the club one night, and she and Scott sang Heart Like a Wheel, and I joined in with a harmony, and that was how we got started. And we only did that. That's the genuine truth. And we did 3 gigs, and we were invited by Ian Green to make an album. And I thought that happened to everybody. I thought, oh, well, it's folk music, you know, I like that. That'll happen to everybody. And it was quite a long time before we realised that, well, you know, that just didn't happen to everybody. But we had been lucky and landed at the right time because there were thousands of musicians, you know, instrument playing bands, but not that many singing bands and with harmonies. so that was, I think that was the reason that we had an appeal that led to us getting the gig. But I also recall really enjoying going down to, it must have been the Edinburgh Folk Festival, and in Chambers Street, that would be right, wasn't it? And in the basement area, there was a separate room for singers, and Danny Kyle was very, and he would be the person who would be inviting people to sing. He was comparing it, and he was very encouraging of everybody singing. And sometimes I think it comes down to personal taste. Some people prefer women singers to men singers, and but I think that whilst personal taste can definitely affect it, I still think that there's a sexism. There is an element where if there are men in the group, people tend to defer to the men and think that they'll be the ones that are doing the organising, not the women who are in the band. And very often they're completely wrong. And some men are aware of that and aware of people's strengths. And when we were starting, I don't know if Scott would be happy for this to be said, but we used to kind of take shots each at introducing songs. And Ian McCalman said one day, no, just let her do it, she's better. He's quite fierce as he can be. And that was what we did. It suited Anne because she would be the person who was leading on big traditional ballads and the lead singer, so it suited her fine. But then I don't know that it suited, and I don't know that it would have suited every man to have been told quite as bluntly as that, no, shut your mouth.
Did he accept it?
Yes, he did. He did.
Kyle was very encouraging. I remember Danny Kyle at one of the sessions in Edinburgh Folk Festival. He was so encouraging of singers, especially people that were unknown. And we were singing at the time with a group of women that had come out of the Adult Learning Project class that I used to teach called Women in Folk Song. Anyway, some of us got together and sang, and Danny Kyle heard us singing. And he just kept, he was so encouraging and got us to sing again, and it just was great, I have to say, good old Danny. And then we went on and we did some gigs. I mean, we never were professionals, but I suppose you could say we were semi-professional. We got paid to sing sometimes. But we often did a lot of women's events and political events as well, charity events.
But Fiona, Fiona, I sang with Anne's sister in a group with Gardina McCulloch and Maureen Jelks, Palaver. And, just getting back to this sort of male-female thing, I remember, and this is quite funny, this wasn't palaver, but just talking about the sexist aspect of it. I'll not say where I was invited to sing, but I was invited by a pipe band to come and sing at a ceilidh they were having. So I said, can I bring my friend? So she came along with me, and Chris is statuesque and very bosomy, and that has quite a dramatic effect on some men. And anyway, I'd said she sings, so I would get up and sing, then they'd have other people doing things, then invite her up to sing. And the guy who was emceeing it, I watched him as the evening went on, as it came to the close of the night and Chris stood up to sing our last song. It was like he saw this as his final opportunity. She was going to be leaving, and God knows what went into his head. But he ran across the floor and he just launched himself at her. And there he was, I was crying with laughter because I thought it was so funny. And she managed to laugh at it as well. But this guy just launched himself across the floor, threw his arms about her, and it was almost as if he was just, because she was quite tall and he wasn't, as if he was just kind of hanging there. But there were also situations where I remember the two of us going into a pub in Edinburgh for a session one Sunday lunchtime, I think it was, and standing at a bar, and this guy who had never met her before, and we're talking about a professional woman with a very responsible day job, a clever woman, and she's standing there, and he starts to make personal remarks about her figure, about her body. And that really made me so mad. what made some men think that was all right? This intelligent, respectable woman he's never met in his life before, and yet because your body is of particular dimensions, they think it's okay to comment on that. And that was maybe 15 years or so ago, but certainly not 20 years ago. So there was quite, as I say, some of it you could laugh at and laugh it off. And she had obviously learned to do that. But actually, it's not acceptable. And in these days of the Me Too movement, I think people would be much more vocal about it. But a lot of men would just think that was funny and not think what it was like to be the person who was standing there on the receiving end of that.
Definitely. That's really interesting, because I think that's something that happens. Well, it still happens, but I think it's maybe something that's maybe changing, like you say, about that kind of laughing it off. I think I certainly was of a generation who probably did just sort of think you had to laugh it off and you had to not make a scene and all these things. And I think the younger generation, to me, are generally, I think, a lot more aware of what is and isn't an appropriate behaviour, which I think is good. At least, I think there's definitely progress being made there, at least in terms of knowing what is and isn't appropriate. I don't know if actually people are behaving more appropriately, but I think there's maybe more awareness.
But maybe better at
quite interesting though, because I've always been a feminist from a very young woman, and I've always been fairly open about it. And men are really quite scared of that, and so they're kind of walking eggs a wee bit around you, they're not sure. And you can be a bit bolshy about it or whatever. But I do understand this laughing it off, because as women, we weren't really brought up to be overconfident, and we were brought up to look attractive for men, really. All the girly magazines around and everything like that, and makeup and all this stuff. And so when they did talk about, we're going to have the lasses on now, we would make jokes about it. And I was always a fall guy, for instance, and stealing gossip, and we'd joke things off about that. And I did the fall guy bit because I was nervous. And so that was my way of dealing with, the shakes and God, what am I doing up here, And so I would just muck about and say ridiculous things, and everybody would be laughing and thought we were great, But I was terrified a lot of the time.
But happens in every walk of life, though. I mean, I was a housing manager for a lot of years, and you would get women coming in, especially older women, and they would say, I want to speak to somebody higher up. And I would say, well, I'll go and get the joiner. He's about 2 inches taller than me. I'm the boss, but he's taller. So do you want me, who can actually make a decision, or do you want the joiner that'll come and do the job? And they'd be really quite taken aback by that, And we had a fabulous Polish workman called George I Fix. He said everything. If you say to him, go and sort that, George, okay, I fix. But I remember being in a house where an housing inspector on one side, me on the other, and George on his knees on the flare looking up a chimney that was smoking, and we were discussing what would need to happen, and eventually I said, George, go and fix it. And he said, okay, she's the boss, I fix. And he did. So these were great, they just it wasn't that he knew his place, it was that he knew his job. And I think that for a lot of the musicians, for some, I'm not saying at all for all men, but for quite a lot of people, there is a suspicion that the male musicians playing instruments are bound to be better than the girls playing the same instrument. And then they meet somebody like Jen or any of the musicians that because they're fabulous musicians. And I've seen in our audience where the audience members are it's the chin drops down when the bands are playing, and at the end they'll say, "She's brilliant, eh?"
What a surprise!
What a shocker. I mean, imagine us booking folk that are great at their job.
I was wondering, Rachel, if like today, I mean, you talk about the younger generation. To you, I think of you as a younger generation, but yeah, there'll be women younger than you coming up. I was just wondering about how comfortable young women feel about performing. I mean, I was always terribly nervous, so I kind of found a niche more in teaching, I suppose, more than so that, and mostly teaching women, I have to say. Run choirs and groups and all sorts of things. But I just wondered how it feels for women today actually performing. As
I think, I mean, in terms of performing, I think there's definitely a lot of very confident women. I mean, I feel very confident performing, and I suppose I always have, and I've always performed. But I think I suppose in terms of performance, what I've noticed and that we've talked about a lot is that women, like young girls, and then going into university and things like that, there's a lot of young women studying music. And then when it comes to sort of the professional arena, there seems to be much more men than women playing, or visible at least. So I don't know if I think there's so many different aspects about that, but I do think that confidence is definitely one of those things. And I think, like I can't remember who was saying, that you had to kind of fight your corner as a woman more, and you have to kind of almost do things twice as well to kind of prove yourself. And constantly feeling like you're being underestimated, and having to kind of show that you actually are in fact just as good. You have to be quite confident to be able to do that, I think.
As you were saying earlier about Celtic connections, I mean, they've had some fantastic, over the years, artists from all over the world, but some amazing women artists as well. So I'm sure that has done a lot for, and all the work that Simon does as well in promoting music. I'm sure that has gone a long way in raising, role models and watching women performing and playing music and singing. I think it's just so brilliant. We see so much more of it now. As I say, Sprang Jean was an all-woman band, and it was like,
yeah, there's definitely more all-female bands now, which is great.
Yeah.
Sorry, Fiona.
One of the things that I think is quite important as well is if you've got an agent, then it's maybe different. But when we started, it was left to Sandy, my husband, who acted as the agent, because I don't think any of us in the band would have said we're really good. Whereas he was quite happy to say they're great. They're great singing and great harmonies. And I think that's important. And I think that women would tend, maybe I'm wrong with this, maybe this is a presumption on my part, but I think that women still would tend to say, well, yes, I think we're very good. Whereas I think a young man would say, we're a great group, we all know exactly what we're doing, you'll be able to get, and they would have a better handle on it themselves. I think that'll be different when you've got an agent.
Definitely.
Here to be a reason.
Yes. I'm aware that the time is ticking. I don't know what should we all have sing a song?
Yeah,
sounds like a plan.
I don't know who wants to kick off.
Well, I'm quite happy to kick off. I don't mind. It's just, thinking about what you're talking about, women and all women groups. And I think confidence comes with age. And that was certainly something I got singing with Gardina and Maureen and Chris. So I'm going to sing one of the songs that we sang together, which is Rosa's Lovely Daughters. We used to be referred to as Rosa's Lovely Daughters, Rosa being Rosa Luxemburg, the Polish-born German revolutionary. So I wish you could join in. Who's that walking miles for water? Who's that sweatshopping all the day long? In the hot south, in the cold north, who are these so bright and strong? We are Rosa's lovely daughters. We are no man's blushing bride. We are Rosa's lovely daughters, and we will not be denied. From the workbench in the back room to the cradle at the side of the bed, from mad mothers to peace campers, who are these seeing red? We are Rosa's lovely daughters. We are no man's blushing bride. We are Rosa's lovely daughters, and we will not be denied. While our fathers handshake their bargains, and their good wives stand around and they weep, but our hearts sing when we're dancing. We are no man's to give or to keep. We are Rosa's lovely daughters. We are no man's blushing bride. We are Rosa's lovely daughters, and we will not be denied. Wearing white scarves in the plaza, burning pass books in the center of town. We are wildfire in the backyard, and that big white house is a burning down. We are Rosa's lovely daughters. We are no man's blushing bride. We are Rosa's lovely daughters, and we will not be denied.
Woo-hoo.
That's a great song, that, isn't it? Okay, who's next then?
Should I go next?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to sing a song called The Early Morning. It's I recently did an album called To the Awe, and it's sort of all women's experience songs, I guess. And this is an old, sort of a version of an old ballad that I'm sure you'll all know, often known as The Outlandish Night or The Elfin Night, I think this one was known as originally. But I thought I'd take the night out of the title altogether. So yeah, I'll try singing this. Okay. They rode and rode and rode away until they came to the sea, and there they pulled their horses up hard by a willow tree. Now get you down, my pretty young love, and hearken unto me. 6 pretty fair maids I've drowned here, and you the 7th shall be. Take off your silk white gown, and give it here to me. A silk white gown is much too fine to rot in the salt sea. Oh, turn about, and face the willow tree, while I take off my silk white gown and give it there to thee. He turned about, and faced the willow tree. She took him in her lily white arms and threw him in the sea. Lie there, my false young love. Lie there instead of me. If 6 pretty fair maids you've drowned here, you can keep them company. She mounted on her milk-white steed and led his dapple grey, and there she went to her parents' house before the break of day. And there she met with her mother dear. Oh, where have you been from me? I've been to church in the early morning to say a prayer for thee.
Lovely.
Oh,
Lovely.
fantastic. Great.
Who's
Okay,
next?
will I go next? Okay. I'm going to sing Bread and Roses. I can't let International Women's Day go by without singing Bread and Roses. This song started off life as a poem written by a guy called James Oppenheim in 1912. And I believe it was inspired by some women mill workers carrying a banner one time on strike saying, "We want bread and we want roses too." So it's become a bit of an international standard. As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mills grey, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are in the struggle, and together we shall win. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient cry for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Oh yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we are standing proud and tall. The rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler tend the toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Yay! Well done. Well, I'm clearing my throat like mad here and may try to sing louder than the plumbers that are working in the house next door. I was in a show called Far, Far from Ypres, and Eileen's son was a big star in that. And there was only one, it's a song about Scots in World War One, the Scots soldier in World War One. And each time that I thought about it, I thought the huge sacrifice that the mothers and the wives and the sisters sending their sons to war. And I remember during Thatcher's era in the Falklands, and how keen she was to have people involved in war. And at that time saying, the closest that my son's going to be at the Falkland Islands is Falkland and Fife. And I meant it then, and maybe there would be less war if people would continue to mean that now. Anyway, this was the only song in the whole show that was sung in Scots. And it's from a poem by Violet Jacob. And she was from a wealthy military family, married a military man. And her only son, Harry, was killed on the song when he was 21 years old, her only child. And I learned this by osmosis from the fabulous singing of Anne Murray, MBE. If I make a backside it, I'll just stop. The Tatillifton's nearly through, they're plewing where the barley grew, and after dark, round Elka Stack, you'll see the horsemen stand and crack, all Lachlan, but a mind on you. A mind fu often we hae seen 10,000 stars keek down atween the naked branches, and below, both firm and both heather show, allow a licht so Halloween. There's bairns wi' gizzards at their tails, clouring the doors were so kail, and fine you'll hear the screeks and skirls, oh, lasses wi' their drooked curls, bobbing for paws i' the pail. The bothy fire is louping het, the new heat horseman's kist is set, rechts o' the lum, or by the blaze, the alding stood that kept your clays. I canna thole to see it yet. But gin the old folks' tales are recht, and ghasts come hame on hallowed nicht, oh friends, what would I gie to feel your racks your hand to me, atween the dark and Connaught licht? Oh, in France, across the wave, the wheelichts burn on ilka grave, and you and me their low hae seen. You'll maybe hear your Halloween yont, while you're lying with a leaf. There's drink and daffin, sang and dance, and ploys and kisses get their chance. But Lachlan, man, the place I see is where your old kist used to be, and the lights o' Halloween in France.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Fiona. That was gorgeous. Gorgeous. So that seems to be us then, eh?
That is loused.
I wish you could go up that hour. That would go another hour.
It feels like there's a lot more to say, isn't there?
There's a lot more to
more.
say. That's what I was thinking, Rachel. So much more to say.
Yeah.
But there you go. Maybe another time.
Looking forward so much to getting back to meeting people and getting back to the music and booking folk, you know.
Can you wait? Can you wait?
Absolutely.
But people like that, Simon, thank you for keeping doing all the work online that you've been doing to keep the music, you know, promoted and keeping singers afloat and musicians afloat. Fantastic.
Right.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye all.
Bye. Cheers.
National
Cheers.
Day. It was brilliant. Thank you.